Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Jens. That was an awesome introduction. Appreciate that. Much appreciated. I am a self-described Agile nerd. I love agility. I love Agile. I know what kind of difference it makes in people's lives. So I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to do what I've been doing for 15 years now. I started as a coach, then I was more of an enterprise coach / enterprise leader, if you want to call it that, and then later on more of a startup founder. But the point is, I've been able to sort of practice what I preach, which is really great. I think very often we can get a little bit theoretical in the way we talk. So I think it's really important to be sort of concrete and fundamental and talk about what actually works, because I think there's a lot of fluff out there. So I'm going to try to share that with you now. And I think it's a really nice thread if you talk about what Jorgen talked about earlier in the unfixed model, which is not very prescriptive at all. I think what we're going to do now is see things that I think aligns nicely with this. Because what I'm going to try to do in this talk is talk about some signs that show you that you're on the right path. Because one thing that I think we've seen is that agility is no longer optional. Like, it's not like we can pretend maybe we should do this or not. But doing it is actually really, really hard. So instead of talking about all the failures, which we do all the time, let's talk about some of the things that give you a clue that you're on the right path. So the 7 signs that I've identified here is based on the data that I have from comparative agility, but also based on my own experience and all the great people I've been able to meet as I've been doing agile transformations for about 15 years now. Not saying there's only 15 or 7 signs, there could probably be more, but these are the ones that I keep seeing pop up, and I want to share those with you. And what I would challenge you to do is to do 2 things. One, as you hear about these signs, ask yourself, is this happening in your organization? And if they are, give yourself some kudos, because this is hard work. But also, if you don't see any of these signs, ask yourself, why is it not happening? Is perhaps something here we should work on a little bit harder? So that's the whole talk. It's supposed to be a positive talk at the end of the day. And I think Jorgen said something in his talk, which I think it goes back to this point as well. We can tell that things are changing. I think, it's a cliche to say that every constant is change, and that's true. But I think it's fair to say that the clock speed of change is accelerating. Things are changing faster now than it did before. There's so many elements, not just in the world, but in the business environment, that keeps happening, that's changing how we work, and in many ways challenging us. Ukraine, let's not even go there, but we know how much that's changing everything else around us. Climate change, we're going to talk a lot about sustainability in this conference. That's another thing that's going to change how we work. You see the same thing when it comes to AI. I mean, we talked about this a lot, but then in November, everything changed. ChatGPT was released, right? And suddenly we said, whoa, what's going to happen now? We're all going to lose our jobs. It just changed everything. It's probably not going to be quite that bad. But still, OpenAI is real, and it's going to change how we work, and the same with AI. And for those of you who can see this little icon over here, have you seen this before? This is a little thing. This is not more than like 3 weeks ago. This is called Threads. It's an app that came out, it's a Twitter competitor. They had 60 million downloads in 16 hours. It is the fastest growing app ever in the consumer space. It just tells you how fast these things are changing. And that's the kind of environment that we have to work with. When you talk of this, we all talk about VUCA. I am assuming at this point everyone knows what VUCA means, right? I'm not going to go into details about what VUCA means, but we understand what it means, and it's something that the military defined a long time ago, and I think it's a good way of describing the way we live today and the way we work. It is volatility. There is a lot of uncertainty. It is no clear cause and effect, and it's true. There's a lot of ambiguity in the way we work, so there is no clear way of doing this, no simple way. The thing about it is, how do we combat this? Or maybe we shouldn't really combat or fight this. Maybe we should try to embrace it. Maybe that's a better way to approach it. This is something that's keeping organizations and their leaders up at night right now. When you ask leaders, what is causing you lack of sleep, they will tell you that it comes down to the fact that they have no sustainable advantage anymore when it comes to competition. They try to create a product, and before you know it, a guy in a startup creates a competition that's much faster. There is no such thing as change being optional anymore. And when you ask executives, this is the number one thing that they think about before they go to bed. It's how can we make organizational agility part of our company? It is incredibly hard to do because we haven't quite figured this out yet. We've heard some stories, right? We heard some stories of companies doing it well, but then suddenly they don't do so well again. I don't want to be too personal, but you probably heard about some, let's say ING, for instance. It's been a success story for some time now, but we've also seen that they're going back. And why is that? Why is it so hard? Well, you've probably all gone through some sort of transformation yourself, and you've probably seen some of the reasons. These are the three main reasons I have seen organizational change fail, at least fail to stick. Number one, lack of executive commitment. Does this resonate with some of you? It starts out well, right? You got the honeymoon period, everyone's ready to go, let's do this, the executive is on board, we get support, we get investments, and then suddenly it's not cool anymore. Or suddenly they have to change. Then it's not so cool. Or a new executive comes on board. Well, we're not going to do this anymore. We'll come up with something else. This is a major reason why these items fail. Here's another one, believing that we're done. I bet you a couple of you heard about that too. The thing about Agile that's so awesome, which is also our problem, is that we can create really quick value propositions and results fast. And when you do that, when you go from more traditional ways of working to more agile ways of working, you can easily get 30 to 40% improvements in speed, in customer satisfaction. That's compelling. But that's also a reason why many people say, oh, this is great, we made it. Let's celebrate. Mission accomplished. This happens all the time. That's, of course, not what agility is all about. And here's another one that I think is a challenge for us. When I say us, I mean us in the Agile community. Failure to show meaningful progress. And when I mean meaningful progress, I mean progress that matters to the business. We have a language that we use. We talk about things like, engagement and those important things. We talk about, hey, we feel more psychologically safe. We've trained more people. We have made sure more teams are agile. Those are good things. But that doesn't really matter to the business at the end of the day. We're not doing agile because we want to be more agile. We're doing it because it supports a business goal. It's an operational strategy that supports a business strategy. So what we need to do is just show meaningful progress towards those business goals. We need to show, and this is the great thing about being agile, it's not vapor. We don't have to pretend. We can show how it has real meaning to financial metrics as well as those other things that we care about very much. So that's one of the things we need to do. Otherwise, once you get over the honeymoon period, these things are going to change. Now, I said this was going to be a positive talk, and I know this sounded kind of negative, so sorry about that. But I wanted to highlight those things do happen. But here's the things that I want you to think about when you see that things are actually going on the right path. Because what happens very often with these organizations that do make it work, and I have been part of many of them, there are a couple of things that go back again and again and again. And I don't know why we ended up in the number 7. It is a good number. It's not too much. It's not too little. I'm sure there are many more, but really these are the 7 signs that I keep seeing among those organizations that are doing it well. So I want to go through those 7 with you, and I'd like for you to see if this is happening in your organization as well. So let's start with number 1. It's really a question. Ask this question to your leader. Would you rather be right, or do you want to be successful? I always ask these questions. When I do executive workshops, it's the first question I ask leaders. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be successful? That sounds like a simple question, right? But it's not so simple. Because very often these leaders are there for a reason. That reason might not be completely aligned with the company. So this question is actually quite profound, and you need to ask that question because very often you will see that those things do not align. Do you want to be right? Do you want to do the thing that is correct? Or do you want to do the thing that actually makes you successful as a company? Let me give you an example. This is something I worked with quite a bit. I'm not sure if you remember this gentleman, Stephen Elop. Do you remember him at all? Yes, a couple of you do. He was the CEO of Nokia back in the day, if you can remember that brand. I used to work with him directly as part of something called the Nokia Builders Program. Basically, the program was pretty cool. They would take some people who were sort of on the ground floor like me, and they would let them work directly with the CEO and give them unfiltered feedback so they can take that into account. That's the whole idea. Now, you may not know this, but Nokia was actually quite agile. If you think about any company that has had any type of impact to organizational agility, I would say Nokia ranks pretty high up there. If you think of less, it probably wouldn't be a less framework if it wasn't for Nokia. If you think of SAFe, you can say good about SAFe, but it probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Nokia. It was a pioneer, and they were quite agile at the enterprise level. Now, the thing about this, when you are agile, one thing that's really great is that you get feedback very quickly. You get to start to see whether or not your strategy is working so that you can adapt. That's kind of part of the point, right? Well, with Steven, his goal was to kill the iPhone. That was essentially his goal when he was brought on from Microsoft. They said, hey, we were the market leader, iPhone came along, now Nokia, you need to kill iPhone. Do you remember the phone that they came out with? This is about 2010, 2011. Yeah, I don't remember. It was called the Nokia Lumia. I don't know if you remember this. I mean, honestly, it was not a bad phone. It was very sturdy, it looked pretty sleek, it had a nice UC interface. The problem was it didn't have an ecosystem of apps. It didn't have Instagram. It didn't have the Bank of America app. And when you don't have those apps, it doesn't matter. A phone is really not worth a whole lot without the apps. So it ultimately did not work really well. The good news is, though, we had data to show that this wasn't working. We could see very early on. And I talked to Steven, and I remember saying this, hey, you know, this is great because we have all this great data now, so we know we can start to pivot. We can start to change strategy. Look at the data coming out of Africa. This is where we started. We launched the phone in Africa, and we can see that there really wasn't a lot of uptake. Why don't we start to change how that's working right now? Try something else. See if we can maybe take advantage of that data and change based on what we're seeing. And he said, no, we're staying the course. Okay, we went a little further. Then we started going over to Asia. That's another hot market. India in particular, South Asia. Same thing happened there. Not a lot of uptake. And we're like, okay, Steven, this is pretty good, right? We're getting a lot of indications this is not working. Let's try to change, to try something else. He said, stay the course. And we stay the course from 40% market share to 3% market share. And ultimately it was sold. He stayed the course. Now, contrast that with this lady, Donna Putz-McKenzie. She was the head of HR when we were running our Agile transformation at Nokia and at Navtech. Now, head of HR, imagine this. We're going all in on Agile. Have you heard of Agile and HR? Well, you probably heard of it at this point, right? But back in 2008, 2009, that was not so common. She was terrified. I remember she was going to go up on stage and talk to her HR associates and talk about the strategy for how we're going to do this. And she came to me and she said, Jorgen, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm terrified to stand up there and tell these people, what the heck does this look like? What am I going to say? And I told her, you know, Donna, be honest. Tell them how you feel right now and what you're going to do to help them. And let's see where we go from there. And she's like, fair enough. And she stood up there on that scene with 200 people looking at her, and she said, you know, I am 100% committed to going Agile. We're going to make this happen. We're going to make this a better organization. I don't know exactly how it's going to look, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet, but we will learn along the way. And I would like for you to be part of that journey with me. And you know what? That just changed everything. Because everyone else was equally confused. And now their leader was willing to say, I might not have all the answers here. I might not be right, but we want to be successful. That's the difference. Steven wanted to be right. He did not care so much about the success of the company itself. He had a strategy, and he wanted to execute that strategy no matter what. And we saw what happened to Nokia as a result of that. In retrospect, and I'll just mention this, since this is not being recorded, maybe it is. Steven had a parachute where he got $25 million personally if Nokia got sold. So it might be that he actually had a different motive altogether. He was not very popular in Finland, let's just say that. But the point being, though, executives very often might have a different motive, and being right is not necessarily the same as being successful. Make sure you have that conversation. What does that look like? Number 2, distributing responsibility. This is one of those that we don't think about very often, which has a lot to do with what you do, but also how you get rewarded. And I think HR plays an enormously important role here. incentives is a good way to say this, the way you get paid, and also disincentives can kill a transformation. I was in the middle of a major change effort at a Norwegian company. I'm not going to say the name of it, but one of the people who were the leaders came to me and he said, hey, Jorgen, I get what you're talking about. I understand the whole optimizing for flow. I love that stuff. It's awesome. But you're asking me to take a 25% pay cut. And I said, what? Pay cut? No, absolutely not. This is great for everybody. I'm not asking you to take a pay cut. And he said, well, you don't understand. I'm responsible for a sector. And in that sector, I have certain goals. And if I were to follow what you say, which means that if I'm seeing other projects that have a higher cost or delay, that are more valuable, I should let some of my people go over there and help them instead of doing the things that I'm doing right now, which isn't so important if I'm being objective. But if I do that, I will not meet the goals of my sector, which means I will not get my bonus, which means I don't get my 25%. And it kind of dawned on me that, you know what, that's not right. It's not right for us to demand that our leaders should take a 25% pay cut for this to happen. We are in fact creating structures and policies that actively work against agility. So look for that. Look for those rewards. Look for those. Are we optimizing for the whole? Is everybody in that value stream incentivized to make this work? So that if Joe over here is suffering, is it going to somehow punish you if you try to help Joe? Or are you going to sit there and say, oh, I'm going to make my metrics happen? So something to look at. Number 3, aiming for good enough certainty. This is hard for a lot of us. A lot of us are engineers. A lot of us come from a technical background. We want to be certain. We want to get this right. But the point is, in complex environments like we work in now, there is no such thing as certainty. And I love this quote from Bezos. The idea here is that in environments of high variability, which is what we're working on here, the time it takes to make a decision is more expensive than recovering from a mistake. And I love what he's saying here. Decisions should be made with about 70% of the information you wish you had. Wait for 90% and you're too slow. The point being is that in complex environments, there is no simple cause and effect. There is no way to have all the answers before you start. And if you spend a lot of time trying to get it right, you're actually spending too much time. And it's better for you to actually try something, fail, and then recover from that failure and learn from it. Now, there are different types of decisions, right? There are certain decisions that you can walk in the door and you can walk out again. And there are some decisions where you walk in and you can't get back in. So let's be clear. This doesn't apply to every decision, but in most business decisions, you're better off making that decision without having all the information necessary. Recover is much better than actually waiting and then making a decision. Now, here's another one. This is number 4. Appreciate the importance of doing less work at once. And this is so hard, but this is probably the one thing. If you were asking me, okay, Jorgen, boil down the entire presentation to one thing I should do to be more agile, it would be this thing. Make sure you limit your work in progress at the organizational level. Work in progress is a killer. Doing too many things at once really slows you down. And there's math to help you support that option. Let's first take a story. Steve Jobs, say what you want about him, but he was a genius in many ways. He understood focus. What he would do every year, he would gather his 100 top executives at an off-site, and they would discuss the top 10 things they were going to do for the next year. So he would bring them over, and he would say, all right, guys, and they were mostly guys, sorry, and they would say, okay, let's come up with the top 10 things we're going to do and prioritize that list for me. And there would be testosterone everywhere. It would just be a fight, and they would come up with a list of top 10. And then after about 2 days of fighting, Steve would come in and say, all right, we're scrapping the bottom 7. We're doing 3. That's focus. He understood that this was not just about the brand, what Apple means, but it's also about getting stuff done. Because if you don't focus, doing too many things at once is a killer. This graph here is from Kingman's Law. Have you heard of John Kingman? I think he's kind of an unsung hero. Everyone's heard of Little's Law, but Kingman's Law, I think, is maybe more important. At least together, they tell a very powerful story. Kingman's Law essentially explains to us what happens to wait time in complex environments when you have a high rate of utilization. It essentially says, if you're doing many things at once in environments of high uncertainty, this is what happens to your wait time. And what you can see in this superlinear graph is that once you get to about 85, 90% of utilization, wait times essentially goes infinite. You basically just stop getting stuff done. It's the same thing as your computer and your CPU being at 90%. Have you been in that situation before? Too many things happening with your CPU and it's like, what's happening? Nothing's happening. It just stops working. This happens at the organizational level also. When you're doing too many things at once, too many projects going on at the same time, nothing gets done. Everyone's busy, but nothing gets done, nothing gets completed. This happens at the organizational view as well. So this organizing, WIP, and making sure you have less things happening at once is critical. Now, here's the other side of this, and this is the thing that's going to help you a lot if you understand it. Cost of delay. Anyone heard of cost of delay? I'm sure, yeah, a lot of you have. It's one of those awesome concepts that I don't think a lot of people actually use in practice. Don Reinertsen was the one who came up with it. He calls it the impact of time to life cycle profits, which sounds kind of fancy. But at the end of the day, it's a really effective way to say, what does it cost us? Or what revenue are we giving up if we're not doing something? Now, the problem with cost of delay very often is that the most popular way of doing it is kind of like high, medium, low. You know, if you think of SAFe, don't want to criticize them, but they do a simple way of doing cost of delay by saying, let's just look at the high, medium, low, and then shortest, weighted job first. You know, that's how they do that. This is okay, but it doesn't give you a lot of meaningful data. What you need to do is quantify it. And I know that sounds very intimidating because you're thinking, whoa, how are we going to do that? How do you quantify cost of delay? That's hard. Well, not really. It's possible to be accurate with cost of delay, but not necessarily precise. And that's okay. You don't need to be precise. Here's why. I was on a project, this is about 2 years ago now, where we had that experiment where we said, let's look at all the initiatives that we're working on, all the projects, and let's talk about cost of delay by having finance be involved. So we invited the finance dudes. They were happy to be involved. Usually they weren't. And we said, let's come up with some estimates for cost of delay. Now, they don't have to be exactly precise, but they have to be accurate in the sense that we need to make sure that those assumptions we make are assumptions we can agree on are the best guess we have at the time. Now, what you see is this list, and I'm willing to bet that you will see something very similar if you do an experience like this in your own organization. All of the projects that you're working on, you will see that it basically ends up becoming a Pareto shape. And what you will see there is that 80% of the cost of delay is going to be focused around 20% of the projects. It is a huge difference between those projects that have huge cost of delays and all the rest. So then you don't really have to worry about being precise. I mean, it's easy for us right now to see what's more important. Now, the thing here, of course, is that this is not sorted by priority. This is just sorted by the cost of delay. But if we use cost of delay as a way for us to prioritize, then we can make sure that we actually focus on the most important initiatives, limit our work in progress, and then start being more agile. But without this information, very often how we choose what to do is based on Hippo. You guys have heard of Hippo, right? The highest paid person in the room, or it's based on pet projects, or it's based on some cockamamie reason that some executive comes up with, which is not very business savvy. I think we need to speak the language of the business by using metrics that they actually care about. And once they understand this, you can bet they will care about this. Do you really want to make sure that this particular project does not get in production because of all of these? Probably not. But measure it. Start to think about it. So cost of delay is one of those. All right, number 6, learning to let go of the illusion of control. This is hard for us. I mean, we love to have control, right? We like to know what we're doing. We like to know that if I do this, this is going to happen. I have a flawless system. Well, we don't. And I think the sooner we can let go of that idea, that we know everything and that we can control everything, the better. This is something you probably heard about quite a bit, Chaos Monkey. This is what they do quite a bit at Netflix, and they still do this. I think it goes back to also what our friend Jorgen said earlier, if it hurts, do it more often. What they're doing in the Chaos Monkey project is that they are on purpose taking out certain parts of the system, creating essentially outages, so that the team needs to recover very quickly. Now, they don't take out all of California, obviously. It's a safe to fail type of way. But they take out parts of the system randomly so that we can very quickly create and understand how we work together to recover fast. The idea is we understand and we embrace the fact that we don't have a flawless system. It is not perfect. In fact, we plan for it to fail because we know it will. But when it does, we recover quickly. And ideally, none of us even notice, which is what happens most of the time. So the idea here that we can embrace that fact that we just don't know what we don't know, and instead try to actually embrace that idea of recovering fast rather than never failing in the first place, that's an important element and a sign that you see in Agile organizations. All right, last one, last of the 7. Thank you for being patient. I know there's a lot of them here, but this is the last one. Recognizing that a system is a product of its interactions. This is one of those that sounds so simple, but it is really hard for us to do. This comes from Russell Ackoff, which is kind of one of my heroes now. I didn't discover him until like 3 years ago, I'm embarrassed to say, but he's been in business for a long time. What Russell Ackoff was able to understand very quickly is that when it comes to value creation, it's really not about the team so much. It's about the interactions between the teams. And I could kind of get that sort of intellectually, but it was when I started mapping this out in my projects where it became so clear to me that we don't know what the hell we're doing. It was eye-opening. Here's what I mapped out. This is a project, or initiative, if you want to call it that. You see the weeks over here. They call in me as an Agile coach, and I come in there, and I do a lot of work, and I help them. And this is where I do the work. Those are the green dots. Green dots means that there's actually value added happening. Then as we started looking at this, we said, hey, why don't we actually start to map out the entire process from where we start, where this initiative gets born until it actually goes to production. And we started putting little red dots when we had wait time and nothing happened. And when you look at this, product definition, technical, architecture, legal, all of these things that the teams themselves had nothing to do with, we started seeing a lot of red dots. Then we had leadership sign-off. Even that could take several weeks. And then, of course, the work itself starts happening. And then you have some training to make sure that the field office was ready. And then you have a first contact with the customer after like 48 weeks. Not very agile, right? But I will say to you, most Agile transformations are really focused here. This is where we live. This is IT, this is operations. We don't think about this stuff at all. But this is very much part of creating value. And if you think of cost of delay, as we just talked about, imagine if you can quantify that every single week we don't have a product in production, we're either not reducing costs by $1 million a month as we should, or we're not realizing revenue of $2 million every month. Imagine how much these red dots cost you. And if you could articulate that to executives, maybe they also understand that they need to be part of that journey. Because this is not something that just happens here. It is a transformation that happens across the entire organization. And not until you understand that it's the interaction between the different teams that matter, not the team itself, that's when you start to realize how you create value at the enterprise level. I tell you, Ackoff had this for us, but it didn't make sense to me until I mapped it out. I highly recommend you do that and start from the very beginning. Don't cheat by starting once you understand what to build. Start before what you build has even been defined. That's when you realize the true value and the cost of how not working together has an impact on your company. So those are the 7. What this means from a high level, it really talks about those, in my book, I define them as 5 dimensions of agility. I talk about them sort of as interlapping kind of elements that still have to talk together and to be aligned. You can't really focus on one without the other. And I think it's a fallacy to just focus purely on one of these elements. That happens very often. When I talk about technology, I define that as tool, techniques, methods that help us do work better, faster, more adaptive, whatever. In other words, in technology, we'll think things like Scrum, Safe, Kanban, those kind of things. Technology is sort of where a lot of people focus because they can touch it, they can see it. They can say, oh, we're doing Scrum, we're doing something. It's almost physical. And that's great, but you can't just do that. You also have to focus on organizational design, making sure you optimize for the whole, like we talked about, making sure you understand the whole organization, not just every team. People, we can't just take them for granted, right? We know now that people, if they're not motivated, they're quit. They're not doing their best work if they're not being treated the way they should be treated. Now we have people working from home. How does that work? How do we make sure they can feel empowered there? Still having the kind of conversations they need to have with their colleagues without seeing them every time. And leadership, being the ones that ultimately help the system work. Growth mindset is something we talk about a lot. The idea that you can be open-minded and actually try new things without automatically saying this is wrong. I want to be right? That happens too often. Culture at the end of the day is what's going to keep this together, because at the end of the day, this is a data-driven culture that we're creating, a culture that changes every single day based on the information that we get, a learning organization. And that means you're going to be a little bit better today than you were yesterday. But it's not going to change just day to day. It's over time, and it's continuous. It doesn't end. And I know a lot of people get scared about this. So, 3 parting thoughts. Number 1, this is kind of hard. Unlocking agility at the enterprise level is hard work. It takes significant investments. That's why understand why you want to be agile before you do it. And that's kind of important. Don't do agile just because you want to be more agile. This one, I think, is important. If you say that everything agile is great and everything great is agile, I don't think you're saying anything meaningful. What I mean by that is that there are other ways of working. And there might be times when other ways of working is better for you. If you're telling me, I want to do extreme cost cutting, I want to be the cheapest delivery of this particular item, I am not sure Agile is the way to go. If you want faster delivery, if you want happier customers, hey, I think Agile is great. But if you want cost cutting, Agile is not the way to go. So make sure your operational strategy supports the business strategy. Understand what that business strategy is, then choose what it is. And don't just do Agile because Agile. We do it because it actually supports the business strategy. This is one of those things that is hard for a lot of people to understand, but we know this now. Agile is not something you become, it's something you become more of. It's not a destination. It's not a condition. It's something you continuously do every day, a little bit better today than you were yesterday. These are some of the books that I was consulting as I was doing this together with the experience. I did put my own book on there, which is bad form, but I will hand it out, so I'll make it up for that. But really, especially look at this one here. This is the book I talked about with Donald Reinertsen, Anti-Fragile. Any Nassim Taleb fans in the room? Yes. Wonderful book. I'll definitely recommend you look at that. Actually, all of these are really great, so definitely take a look at those. As you probably have figured out by now, I'm an Agile nerd, so I love to talk about this stuff. If you want to have a chat with me, just send an email at any point. I always answer if it's like 3 a.m, so no problem. There's my email. If you want to check out the book, check it out. I am actually going to hand out some free books also. But yeah, that's really all I had for now. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.